For over 1,000 years, the world called it Abyssinia, a name whispered in Arabian trade routes, written in European maps, and spoken with reverence across medieval courts. But the people living there never called themselves that. They had their own name, one that stretched back 3,000 years. And when colonizers came to divide Africa, this nation did something remarkable. It kept both its name and its freedom. Welcome back to African Folklore Archives family. I'm grateful you're here because today we're exploring a question that reveals everything about identity, colonization, and resistance. Which African nation was formerly known as Abyssinia? The answer is Ethiopia. But that simple answer hides a complex story about who gets to name a people and why that power matters. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and how the weather is treating you today. When most people hear Abyssinia, they think it's Ethiopia's old name, like how Persia became Iran or Siam became Thailand. But that's not quite right. Abyssinia was never Ethiopia's name. It was what outsiders called Ethiopia. An exonym, a name imposed from outside rather than chosen from within. The term Abyssinia comes from the Arabic Al-Habash, referring to people living in the Ethiopian highlands. Arab traders used this term for centuries when describing the Christian kingdom across the Red Sea. Europeans adopted it, and soon Abyssinia appeared on maps, in books, in diplomatic correspondence. By the medieval period, the entire Western world knew this African nation as Abyssinia. But here's what's crucial. Ethiopians never stopped calling themselves Ethiopians. The name Ethiopia appears in ancient Greek texts, in the Bible, in Ethiopian manuscripts dating back over 2,000 years. While the world called them Abyssinia, they maintained their own identity, their own name, their own sense of who they were. In this video, I'm showing you how Ethiopia's refusal to accept imposed names mirrors their refusal to accept imposed rule, and why both forms of resistance matter. What topic about African nations and their histories baffles you most? Drop it in the comments below, and I'll research it for a future video. The name Ethiopia comes from the ancient Greek Ethiopia, meaning land of burnt faces, a term Greeks used for dark-skinned peoples south of Egypt. By the time of Homer's Odyssey, Ethiopia was already legendary. Greek historians wrote about Ethiopian kingdoms with awe and respect. The Ethiopian eunuch appears in the New Testament, showing how deeply this nation was woven into ancient Mediterranean consciousness. But Ethiopia's own traditions claim even deeper roots. According to the Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, the Ethiopian royal line descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Whether literal history or powerful mythology, this tradition gave Ethiopian emperors a sense of ancient legitimacy that matched any European dynasty. They saw themselves as heirs to biblical greatness, as Christian kings ruling an ancient land. The Ethiopian Empire, often called Abyssinia by outsiders, officially existed from 1270 until 1974, over 700 years. But Ethiopian statehood reaches back much further. The kingdom of Aksum, Ethiopia's predecessor state, flourished from the 1st to 8th centuries CE, minting its own coins, building massive stone obelisks, and trading with Rome, India, and Arabia. This is important context. When European colonizers arrived in Africa claiming to bring civilization, Ethiopia could point to written records, architectural monuments, and international trade networks that predated many European kingdoms. Ethiopia wasn't just resisting colonization, it was defending a civilization older than most of its attackers. The territory historically called Abyssinia included what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. These highland kingdoms, protected by mountains and fierce warriors, maintained independence while empires rose and fell around them. They survived Islamic expansion, Ottoman pressure, Egyptian aggression, and finally, European colonization attempts. Comment and like this video, and also subscribe to support this channel. Your subscription is tremendous support for me, and it means the world to me as African Folklore Archives is still growing, and every subscriber helps us reach more people who need to hear these powerful stories. Now here's where the name becomes politically significant. During the scramble for Africa in the late 1800s, Italy decided to colonize Abyssinia. They had already taken Eritrea and Somalia. Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, as Europeans still called it, was next on their list. In 1889, Italy tricked Emperor Menelik II into signing the Treaty of Wuchale, deliberately mistranslating it to claim Ethiopia had become an Italian protectorate. Menelik rejected this deception and prepared for war. On March 1, 1896, at the Battle of Adwa, Ethiopian forces decisively defeated Italy. It was one of the most significant African military victories in the colonial era. Ethiopia kept its independence, while nearly every other African nation fell to European control. But here's what's fascinating about names and power. Even after this victory, European maps and documents continued calling the nation Abyssinia. Why? Because using the name Ethiopia, the name Ethiopians used for themselves, would acknowledge their agency, their self-determination, their right to define themselves. Abyssinia was easier for European powers. It kept Ethiopia at a comfortable distance, still exotic, still other, still not quite equal. The shift from Abyssinia to Ethiopia in international usage happened gradually through the 20th century, particularly after Emperor Haile Selassie addressed the League of Nations in 1936. Selassie, speaking after Italy's second invasion using chemical weapons, used Ethiopia consistently. He insisted the world recognize his nation by its proper name. As Ethiopia became a founding member of the United Nations and the Organization of African Unity, Ethiopia became the standard international designation. By 1974, when the monarchy fell and the Ethiopian Empire officially ended, the name Abyssinia had largely disappeared from official use. Ethiopia had won, not just military independence, but naming independence. They controlled their own identity. Comment below and let me know which aspect of this story intrigued you most. Was it learning that Abyssinia was never Ethiopia's own name? The connection between naming rights and political power? The way Ethiopia maintained its identity through centuries of outside pressure? Your thoughts help shape the stories we explore together. This story matters because names are never neutral. Throughout colonization, Europeans renamed African places, ignoring indigenous names and imposing their own. The Congo became Belgian Congo and Zaire, before finally becoming Democratic Republic of Congo. Rhodesia honored Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer, until Zimbabwe reclaimed its identity. Countless cities, rivers, and mountains still carry colonial names today. Ethiopia stands out because it never fully surrendered naming rights. Yes, outsiders called it Abyssinia, but Ethiopians never accepted that name internally. They maintained Ethiopia in their own documents, their own consciousness, their own identity. When independence was already theirs to keep, they simply waited for the world to catch up and use the right name. This connects to broader themes in African history. The power to name yourself is fundamental to freedom. Enslaved Africans renamed by slave owners. Colonized territories renamed by European powers. Indigenous peoples whose lands were discovered and renamed by explorers who were actually latecomers. The violence of imposed names mirrors the violence of imposed rule. Ethiopia's story teaches us that resistance takes many forms. Military resistance at Adwa. Diplomatic resistance at the League of Nations. Cultural resistance by maintaining ancient traditions, languages, and scripts. And naming resistance, the persistent, patient refusal to be called anything other than what you call yourself. Today, Ethiopia remains Ethiopia. The name Abyssinia survives mainly in historical texts and romantic literature. But the lesson survives too. Identity is not given by outsiders. It's claimed by those who live it, maintained through generations, and defended as fiercely as any border. For African people worldwide seeking to reclaim identities distorted by colonization, Ethiopia's example shows that names matter, identity matters, and the right to define yourself is worth protecting across centuries. If this exploration of how one African nation kept its name and freedom has moved you, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this video. Ethiopia's story reminds us that the power to name ourselves, to define our identity on our own terms, is a form of sovereignty worth fighting for, whether that fight happens on battlefields or in the persistent, daily act of calling ourselves by our true names.